Hello and welcome. This is Omar Torres, and you're listening to Pop Therapy, a podcast that explores the intersection between psychology and pop culture. There's so much to unpack, so join me and let's get started. Well, there is no synonym for cinnamon. There is no synonym for cinnamon. That is a tongue twister. It's also one of my vocal warm-ups. I know you guys were begging to know what the vocal warm-up was. That's one of them. There is no synonym for cinnamon. Try saying that 3 times fast. I don't have a ton to update you all on, except for one little thing, which is that I'm taking a breathwork class on Wednesday of this week. One of the main reasons why I'm looking forward to it is because, one, it's being done by a friend / colleague of mine, Jerry. Really excited. He's been doing breath work for a really long time and leading classes for a while too now. But the main reason why I am excited is because it's a nostalgia breathwork class. Basically, he's going to be playing music from when my peer set, millennial, very squirrely millennial, were when we were kids. So that he's going to be playing all the hits when we were kids while doing breathwork class. And we're going to be essentially processing the nostalgia that comes of it. I'm so fascinated by that. I find nostalgia to be a really, really interesting topic. The way that nostalgia edits and re-edits memories, I find really fascinating. I wonder if there's some sort of psychological necessity there. Like, nostalgia is hardwired in our brains because back when we were living in caves, maybe it helped in some way, or maybe it helped with relationships, like maintaining relationships and community. In any case, I find it a truly interesting topic. It comes up a lot in the work that I do, the therapy work that I do, obviously, especially when it comes to breakups. I find that it comes up a lot, nostalgia, often in how we process the breakup and how we process the memories. So if you've ever had an instance where you are thinking about a relationship that ended and you're only thinking about the good parts, or you're only remembering all the romanticized parts of it, or maybe you are romanticizing a lot of the relationship from your past, from this particular relationship in your history, and that is nostalgia at work. So in the work that I do with my clients, if they're processing a breakup, this comes up often. It's just one of those things you have to keep an eye on when it comes to processing a breakup, especially a breakup that obviously was in your best interest, or a breakup that was really, really awful, or if you broke up from someone that was mistreating you a lot, we'd have a tendency to remember or romanticize a lot of the memories. So that's nostalgia. Anyway, I can go on and on and on about it. So it's a nostalgia breathwork class. I will report back about how it went when I finish it, obviously. But I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to experiencing whatever comes up for me in the breathwork class. I'm curious to see if any memories are activated that maybe I forgot, or if there are any old feelings that come up for me that I haven't accessed in a while. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe I'll feel like a teenager again. Maybe I'll feel more energized, or maybe I will, I don't know, crawl into a ball and just sob and sob and sob. Who knows? In any case, stay tuned. Let's dive right in. So I'm going to be continuing my recap of the latest season of the hit reality show Couples Therapy. And today we're going to be going over episode 2. Also, if these are helpful or fun or entertaining or anything positive, let me know if you actually like these. I want to do what I find interesting, but I also kind of need to be entertaining too at the same time if I want this little engine that could to keep on cutting. So with that being said, without further ado, let's dive right into episode 2 season 5 of Couples Therapy. So we open up with our couple, Sienna and Chris, and this is where this notion of a play within a play, you start to see that unfold a little bit more. In the first episode that I went over last week, Orna talks about infidelity as a play within a play. Or that's how she conceptualizes it, right? That's how she thinks about it in her head, because there is a story within the story. So she needs to understand that story that's hidden underneath the main story, which is the relationship. That unfolds a little bit here. You see how Orna navigates that through the work here. And they go right into the cheating. So Chris, quick reminder, Chris hired cuddlers, professional cuddlers, 2 of them, and ended up becoming sexual. So he talks a little bit about the cheating, and he says that he thinks that there is a direct link between the betrayal and the profound abuse he experienced when he was a kid. Or no, without any irony in her tone, I mean, totally sincere and totally in earnest. She just goes, yeah, obviously, like, like, duh, bitch. And so she says that she wanted to wait a little bit longer. She tells Chris, I wanted to wait a little bit longer before I asked you more about the abuse. Basically, what she's touching on is the fact that as therapists, we try our best to build like a pretty solid rapport, a solid relationship with our client before we ask them to divulge some of their most intimate memories or secrets or some of their most traumatic memories. Now, not every therapist does this, and this is really a stylistic choice. So early on in my career, I used to want to dive right. I'm talking like session 1 or 2. I'm like, let's talk about your capital T trauma. Over time, I have appreciated the art of building more trust in the beginning. I've appreciated just like getting to know the person a little bit more before I ask them to divulge really, really traumatic events and memories. It's not necessarily like I'm noticing a huge difference in my practice now or anything like that. I just think for me, it's a better practice. I don't know. I think a strength of mine as a clinician is the rapport part, building the relationship part. And so I've learned to lean into that a little bit more before diving right into the trauma. A lot of the reason why early on in my career, I was so used to diving right into the trauma is because a lot of the work I used to do kind of required that, because I would do intakes with clients. So I would see someone, when I worked for a nonprofit, I would see someone who was enrolling in the mental health program, and I would do their intake. And it's like a 90-minute, 2-hour questionnaire, basically, where I'm asking them a lot of really intense questions. And so I think that's like, I just like got into the habit of diving right into that. As I've gotten older, as I've been doing this work more, I'm like, let's wait a little bit. Let me chill a little bit, pump the brakes a bit, and let the person kind of warm up to me a little bit more and let the person trust me a little bit more. So that is what Orna is speaking to here when she talks about, like, I wanted to wait a little bit before we dove right into this profound trauma that Chris went through. And so one of the things that he says is, in response to that, right, he's like, yeah, I can dive right in. I'm very open. And Orna very cleverly goes, I'm sure you're very open. But the question is, what does that do to you to dive right in? And as Chris is talking about his trauma, you see actual literal physiological changes happening. His neck gets bright red as he is, and he's not even doing like a deep dive into the trauma. He's like just scratching the surface of the trauma. And so in talking about nightmares that he used to have after his mother passed away, even that, you could see the physiological changes happening. So he wasn't even necessarily talking about the trauma specifically, but just talking about having nightmares about his mom elicited this physiological reaction, right? I can feel myself when talking about it, when diving in, when being open about it, I can feel myself getting really hot. And it's, Orna obviously calls out, yeah, those are the feelings. There's a lot of feelings there. So also, for those that are watching the video, this is my notebook. I don't know if anyone is new. Hi, I use a notebook, so that's why I'm looking down right now, just to look at my notes. So one of the things that I found so enlightening, and this is why I feel like I should get continuing education credits from watching this show. I really do. I learned so much. One of the things that she points out as a possibility is Chris using talking about the trauma as a way of dissociating, which I thought was so clever. We tend to think of talking about trauma as a healing, cathartic experience. And Chris even says, like, oh, maybe I am so open and ready to talk about this profound trauma because I want to purge it. I want to get it out in order to get through it. And Orna says, or maybe you're actually talking about it to disassociate, to disconnect and disengage from it. It's almost as if getting it out of your brain, vocalizing it and getting it out is a way of distancing oneself from the trauma, which I thought was so profound and so smart. Because again, conventional wisdom would have us believe that talking about it is really healthy and cathartic, and it must mean that you are processing something well. And what this proves, what this highlights rather, is that people can talk about really traumatic events and not be processing it. They can be talking about something traumatic as a way of kind of like getting it out and putting it over there, having it be somewhere else outside of them, instead of also processing the feelings that are coming up, which is why it was so lovely when Sienna, Chris's wife, paused for a moment and just acknowledged Chris's physical reactions, and just like taking a moment, taking a beat to recognize, talk about, and name what was happening for him in that moment. So that's how you fully process something. So when we talk about processing something well or thoroughly, or usefully, maybe, it's not only talking about it, going over the memories and talking about what happened to you, but it's also talking about what's happening to you in the moment as you are sharing, what's coming up for you in the moment as you are talking about these memories. And that's what Chris gets to do a little bit. So there's a scene where Orna meets with her clinical supervisor, Virginia, and they talk a little bit about Chris and Sienna. So this is also very common in the therapy world for a therapist to have like a go-to person, usually someone that's been in the game longer than ourselves, not all the time, but often. And it's usually someone, you know, that you like really respect and admire, and whose clinical prowess, I always say that word wrong, whose clinical prowess you aspire to be like that person clinically, at least to some degree, right? Maybe not a carbon copy, but to some degree you aspire to be like them clinically. So Orna's clinical supervisor is Virginia, and they're talking a little bit about the splitting that Chris does, meaning there's this thing that Chris says regularly where he's like, I did this terrible thing and I don't know why. I love my wife. She's awesome. I can't believe I cheated on her. I just don't understand why. And Virginia, whether you agree with her or not, but Virginia sort of clocks the like, Why? You know, my wife is so wonderful. How could I do this? Why did I do this? And Virginia sort of says that it's a little bit of an avoidance strategy. Why? Virginia, I think, very aptly points out all he needs to do is spend 2 seconds exploring this. And on the other side of that, he will get to the why. And so the splitting, the disconnect from the behavior and the why, the splitting of those two things is often a sign of avoidance, and not in a malicious way, but you know, we avoid things all the time, and sometimes for very good reason, or very valid reasons, or important reasons, or meaningful reasons. And sometimes we avoid because we don't want to face the thing that is going to potentially cause us really intense discomfort. It can be really, really painful and hard and sad and kind of heartbreaking when you confront something that you've done that hurt someone else. So perhaps in an attempt to avoid that intense pain within himself, he's sort of, I don't understand why I did this. And to Virginia's point, she's like, well, think about it. Like, kind of like, we'll figure it out. You know what I mean? It won't take long for you to understand why you did this. And so they cut back to Sienna and Chris talking a little bit about the abuse and the betrayal. One of the things that Chris mentions is that he created a situation with these professional cuddlers where he would be really well liked. What's kind of unfolding to the audience is that he really needed to feel liked by someone, well, by these women. And Sienna, his wife, points out something kind of crucial here. So Chris says, I set up a situation where like I wanted to be well liked. So I hired these women and I just like desperately wanted them to like me. And so I basically did whatever I could to make sure of that. Sienna says, I saw pictures of these women and they weren't just anybody. It wasn't just random professional cuddlers. They were, you know, and this is Sienna saying this, they were hot, younger, 20s, 30s, big-breasted women. So these were, according to Chris, hot women that he was doing this with. And so I appreciated that, like Sienna sort of saying, yes, I know you want it to be well-liked, but there was this other element to it that is worth mentioning, right? And I agree. And Sienna talks about how difficult that was for her, right? She is getting older, and she has insecurities, as many of us do, about aging. And seeing the pictures of these women did not help. I wonder how helpful or useful or necessary it was for her to see the pictures of these women. I'm sure there are plenty of people that would agree that they would be like, I need to see who these women are. And the details that Sienna was able to share in that session about what they looked like, their physical attributes, I think was important because, again, these weren't just random ladies. And at the same time, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I would ask for that. I don't know if I would want to know what the person that my partner cheated on me with looked like, for that very reason, because it would probably send me into more of a tailspin than I would already be in, especially if they were like hotter than me and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, great. So I commend Sienna. I don't know if she asked to see the pictures or if through going through his phone, she found it up. They don't mention that here, but she knows what these ladies looked like. They were hot, and that would drive me absolutely bonkers. If they were like deeply unattractive, I could be like, well, at least I have that. But no, so you can tell that for Sienna, that was, a hot button issue, a hot button part of this betrayal that's going on here. So Orna asks for a little bit of background information. She refers to it as background. She doesn't ask, hey, Chris, why did you do this? Which I think is clever, and I imagine that was intentional. Like, instead of why did you do this, which I think would bring them back to what I mentioned earlier, the splitting that Chris was doing, where he's like, I don't know why, I don't understand why. My wife is so amazing, I love her so much, I don't know why I did it. Instead, she reframes the question, I think, again, intentionally, to get Chris to think a little bit more thoughtfully and to be a little more tuned in and a little bit more onto himself. So she asks, tell me a little bit of background about the betrayals. And that's when we start to see a little bit more of an understanding of what was going on for Chris. So Chris is talking about what led to the betrayal, what was going on for him mentally, wanting to be liked. You can see Sienna is getting upset, obviously, rightfully so. Orna pauses and checks in with Sienna. What's going on for you? Where are you right now? Which she's really good at. And Sienna talks about the fact that she is concerned that all common sense was put aside to do this thing. And then Orna very thoughtfully asks, and what would common sense say in this moment or in that moment? And basically, to Sienna's point, she was like, you know, I am as open as a pair of French doors. That's what she says, which they don't get into what exactly she means by that. I'm going to make some assumptions here for y'all. I'm assuming what she means is I'm game. I am down for, whatever my husband is into sexually. I'm like open to that. And I'm open to discussing that. And I get the sense that what she meant was, I'm pretty open. I'm pretty down to explore. I'm down to let my husband explore as long as I'm looped in on what's going on, as long as there's no betrayal and deceit part. And Chris says that that's partially how he was able to justify the betrayal, is because he told himself, well, if I went to Sienna and told her this, she would be cool with it anyway. So Chris says, I justified it in my mind by sort of convincing myself and reminding myself, oh, well, Sienna would be okay with it anyway. She'd be cool with it. And he says, but I knew that if I brought this to her, that it would turn into a whole thing. Right. Which is just like, yes, there's a common theme here that I'm going to keep bringing up. They don't necessarily explicitly mention this on the show, but this is something that I, as a therapist, see a lot, which is the very conversation that we often avoid in relationships is exactly the conversation we need to be having, right? Maybe not in that second, maybe not in that very moment, but eventually. That's right. The thing you don't want to talk about, it needs to be the thing that you talk about. And he mentions that he didn't want to bring this up to his wife because he hates when she is upset, that he hates upsetting her. He doesn't say this, but what he's really saying is that he hates disappointing her. And this is something that comes up in so much of the couples work that I do, and in the individual work that I do with folks in relationships, when they talk about not saying the thing out of fear of upsetting or disappointing their partner. The problem is that's where the answer is. It's in the conversation with your partner. That's where the answer lies. And unfortunately, one of the things that happens if we continue to avoid the conversation that we need to be having is it comes out in some other maladaptive, unhealthy, sometimes hurtful and painful way. He betrays her and does it without her knowing. And that's how that leads to trouble. So, keep in mind that if there's a conversation with your partner that you are avoiding because you're afraid of upsetting them, you gotta give them a chance to be upset. That's like one of the things I work on in the couples therapy work that I do too, which is letting your partner have an emotion and express an emotion, and you tolerating it, you enduring it. Of course, respectfully. This is all under the assumption that everyone is being respectful. And there's a difference between being respectful and nice. So you can be angry and express your anger, and it may not be nice, but it can be respectful. So Sienna talks about how resentment was building in her life, had been building, because in an attempt to avoid upsetting Chris, she would make herself smaller. So you're seeing both of them talk about having a very similar experience with each other. They're both doing a version of, I'm going to contort myself or avoid something to make my partner feel better or to ensure that my partner doesn't get upset. And this is what ends up happening. This is why having respectful conversations with your partner about something that might upset them is so crucial, to have those conversations as soon as possible. With support, of course, maybe from a couples therapist, that can be super helpful. A couples therapist can help couples have guided, supported conversations so it doesn't go off the rails. But that's why these kinds of conversations are so important. And you see here the both of them doing a little bit of an avoidance thing, and you see where that led. It led to resentment, it led to betrayal, and it led to pain. So again, that's not to say you need to have that hard conversation right this second. That's not what I'm implying. What I am saying, the sooner the better. What I am saying is maybe get some help, enlist and recruit some help if you're in a similar situation, in order to develop the skills and tools necessary to have these tough conversations. And the tough conversations can be anything from, I want to move to a different place. I want to quit my job and I want to start a brand new career in a totally different industry. It can be, I don't want to have kids, or I do want to have kids. It can be, I want to explore opening up our relationship. I mean, there's like so many kinds of these conversations that I'm referring to when I talk about, quote unquote, the hard conversation that you are avoiding, that we are avoiding. So moving right along, the next couple that we get to see are Shay and Clinton. So just a quick reminder, Clinton in the first episode talks about being diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So we check in on Shay and Clinton, and they're in the waiting room. You see them, and it is tense. They're not speaking. They're both staring straight ahead and not looking at each other. They get into the session, and again, the tension is palpable. You can cut it with a knife. So Shay starts talking about finances, and very quickly, Clinton starts to feel overwhelmed. So Orna checks in with him and basically encourages him to stay engaged in the conversation a little bit more, and encourages him to think about, what does he need? What does maybe even Shay need in order to have a space where everyone is listening to each other. So she encourages Clinton to turn around and face Shay. Clinton suggests himself, like, you know what, I'm going to get a drink of water. So she really kind of like warms him up for this tense conversation, which is really great therapeutic work, helping your client kind of ease into a difficult conversation. And that's what couples therapy can help all of us do, is just sort of like warm up to stay engaged with a difficult conversation. And the conversation that comes up is tale as old as time, folks. It's finances. They're talking about finances. And Shay talks about taking on quite a bit of financial responsibility for Clinton. She talks about paying off his credit cards, his credit card debt, in order to help him rebuild financially, in order to help him have a fresh start. And unfortunately, Clinton eventually loses his job. That causes a ton of strain. While talking about the finances and the credit card debt, Clinton starts to have what they call a meltdown. And I really feel for both of them. I feel for Shay because you can tell she's like, this man's overwhelmness takes up all the space in a room, and then I can't have my feelings. I can't express my feelings because my partner is overwhelmed. And that's really, really challenging and really, really painful. It can feel really lonely when you don't think or you don't feel like there's any room or space for your emotions. And you really feel for Clinton too, because being overwhelmed or flooded is a very common experience for folks on the spectrum. And it's something that's really challenging and difficult to navigate. And it does like halt everything, because once Clinton is overwhelmed, it's really difficult to get back on track. Not impossible, because Orna does a really good job of asking Clinton to talk a little bit about what's happening to him in that moment. Orna offers language that Clinton is then able to borrow in order to talk about what he's experiencing in that moment. So Orna very thoughtfully says, would it be helpful if I guessed what was happening to you right now, as Clinton was having a meltdown? And he said, yes, I think it would be helpful. And she says, do you feel incompetent? Do you feel shame? And that allowed Clinton to speak more specifically to feeling looked down upon. So Orna encourages Clinton in that moment to remain engaged. She normalizes this for him. She says, everyone has trouble with this. This is what it's like to be in a relationship. People annoy each other. People frustrate each other. People hurt each other. And we have to talk about it. And we have to make room for your partner to talk about what's upsetting to her. So she gives Shay basically the green light to talk about why she's upset. And this is what I found so fascinating. And again, Orna does such a good job of bringing something to the surface. So Shay talks about the fact that she's taking on a lot of financial responsibilities. She's paid off debt. She hasn't been paid back fully yet. She talks about Clinton buying things with her credit card without asking her. And she says, the way that I feel loved is by doing actions, right? So she's like, so I need to see actions. I need to see things happening in order to feel loved. And Orna very astutely says, and I'm going to look at my notes here because I don't want to butcher it, but she says, if you're measuring those actions as signs of love and you're landing exactly on where Clinton has trouble, how is that going to work? But I think this is a really therapeutic way of basically asking someone to take a moment to reflect on their role in what's happening and their role or their choice to engage in this dynamic. So basically what Orna is saying, to break it down, is so you're looking for someone to show you through actions that they can be trusted, so that way, and that they can be financially responsible, so that way you can feel loved or taken care of. And you are in a relationship with someone who has financial issues. You specifically chose to be with someone who can't really do that, who can't really show you the actions that you are looking for. So basically, how is that going to work, right? And it's a really helpful way to get a client thinking about, to get Shay thinking about like, yeah, it's kind of like setting myself up to continue not to feel loved, and it's setting Clinton up to feel incompetent or to feel inferior. And so I find that really helpful, because at some point, if you are in a dynamic that is really frustrating or hurtful or painful, at some point, you got to ask yourself, why am I choosing this dynamic specifically? Why am I choosing to be in a relationship with someone who is really struggling financially, who for reasons, some no fault of their own, some of these reasons are outside of what he can control, right? It's difficult for him, maybe, probably because of his diagnosis of autism. It's probably difficult for him to get a job or to hold down a job. I'm not entirely sure, but you're choosing to be in a relationship with someone who is struggling financially, who has these financial issues, and you're looking for actions connected to financial stability and reliability in order to feel loved. So what are you doing here, right? Like, what you doing here, girl? And essentially, this session is about making room for the emotions that both individuals are having within the session. And that's one of the things, maybe even the main thing, that Shay and Clinton are really struggling with. Clinton hates disappointing Shay. Are we noticing a theme here? Clinton hates disappointing Shay. He gets so upset at disappointing her that there is then no room and space for Shay to talk about the fact that she's upset and disappointed. It leaves both of them feeling incredibly lonely. And a lot of the work in the session is about making room for both. It's about allowing feelings to be expressed without it triggering, in this case, Clinton specifically. She's helping him kind of endure it, and she's helping Shay reflect on her choice to be in this dynamic. Again, in like a really helpful, respectful way. At the end of the session, there is a hug scene. Again, it's so tense. I really feel for both of them. You can tell Clinton is trying to repair in that moment, or just trying to de-escalate or cut the tension in that moment, which I don't blame him for wanting to cut the tension. And you can see Shay just holding on to so much pain and so much resentment, maybe anger, I would imagine, disappointment, and really struggling to meet Clinton where he's at. Again, I think we've all been there, where a hug is probably, quote unquote, the right thing to do, quote unquote. But you're just like not there. You know what I mean? You're just like, you just don't want to give the hug. Maybe you've given too many, or maybe you're just like not there. You're just not there physically, emotionally. And she ends up giving him a hug, but you can see on her face how challenging it was to accept the hug and give one back. Orna meets with a specialist, and this is just a quick note about just like how good Orna is as a therapist. She doesn't specialize in working with folks that are neurodivergent, specifically autism. And so she meets with an autism specialist in order to make sure that what she's doing clinically so far is sound, that it's actually helpful. She's checking in to make sure that she's not actually causing harm. And she's checking in to make sure that she's not missing anything that is vital to the clinical work that they're doing. So she meets with a specialist, they have a conversation. about just some things that Orna can be aware of, some things for Orna to keep doing in order to help Clinton through this very difficult process of couples therapy. Moving right along to Marjorie and Jason. So this is the couple last week, the couple that talked about their political differences. So they come in and right away they start talking about all the animals they have. And Jason specifically talks about how there's all these animals in the house and they basically like they get on the bed and they leave like drool marks on his bed, and his sleep is very, very important to him. And Marjorie starts to talk about how Jason needs things to be done in a particular way, that he needs to have things done in a very specific way, like his way, right? And you can tell Marjorie is speaking to a rigidity here, that it's very specific, it's very rigid, and it's very strict. What Orna brings to the surface, which she rightfully names, is the fact that they both have different ideas and standards of living and of how to do things. And they're like, yes, we do. And just that simple, doing the simple act of like, let me just name what's happening here, okay? The both of you have different standards and different ideas about how to live and how to maintain a household. Like, normalizing that is a really great place to start. Just saying like, okay, we have a different set of rules here. We're both a little bit different when it comes to household maintenance, chores, what have you. And that's okay. What Orna encourages them to do is to then essentially develop the process by which they can have these conversations and problem solve. So that's what she's helping them to do. It doesn't matter what the conversation is. It could be politics. It could be cats and cat litter and cleaning that and chores and labor. It really doesn't matter. We are here to work on the process that you can apply to any and all kinds of conversations. So let's do that now. Let's talk about what the problem is here and let's practice problem solving together, right? And so they pick specifically cleaning out the cat litter is the thing they decide to have a discussion about. So Jason says something about like, if you clean the cat litter, some days I can clean it other days. Basically, there starts to be a conversation about how cleaning the cat litter can get done. Marjorie starts to then say, yeah, but you wouldn't even know how to do it, even if we did. And she stops herself. And this is what's so great. She stops herself and she goes, ugh, I'm doing it again. And Orna goes, what are you doing again? She goes, I'm being mean. And Orna's like, okay, great. You called it out. You noticed it. Now let's try this again. She goes like, let's do this again. Let's try this again. She goes, see how the conversation fell apart 2 seconds in? And so I like this. Marjorie and Jason start cracking up in response to the fact that Orna's like, okay, we didn't do this very long and it's off the rails. It's falling apart. And they're cracking up, which again, I think it's a connecting laugh. It's not an avoiding laugh. It's a knowing laugh. It's like, oh, brother, you're right. It is falling apart. Like, we are really struggling with this. So in this moment, I appreciated the both of them laughing. It also warms things up a little bit sometimes. For this couple, I would say it does in this moment. It just like warms it up a little bit. It lightens things up a little bit. It lowers the stakes just a little bit more, which I appreciated. And they try again. Orna notices very quickly that Jason does have a very strict and rigid way about him and very strict and rigid way of doing things around the house, let's say. And not just around the house, but in this example, we're talking about household chores. And Orna asks him to share a little bit more background around where that came from and why that's so important to him. And again, the show does such a good job of really humanizing everybody, but in this instance, Jason. And you hear about his really, really difficult childhood. His dad wasn't around. His dad ran out on them when he was a kid. Jason got into heroin when he was a teenager. And he talked about just how profound his drug use was, how awful it was. And you could like see it in his eyes, just like how serious he takes this and how painful this must have been for him. This time of his life must have been for him. And your heart just kind of breaks for him. And, you know, side note here, remember in the previous episode, Jason talks about voting for Trump. There's this common theme here that I've noticed with a lot of these like alt-right, red pill, manosphere, incel-y type guy, and daddy issues, essentially. And I do not say daddy issues pejoratively, not in a minimizing way. But a lot of these men I find that are, you know, kind of a little right-wingy, again, manosphere-y, all have really, really strained relationships with their fathers or no relationship with their fathers. And it's just an interesting connection that I'm noticing, there's like a prevalence there that's happening. And so take that for what you will. Just something that I'm noticing here that I think is relevant to a lot, not only Jason and a lot of the work that he's doing, but it's relevant to a lot of what we're seeing culturally, politically right now. So Jason talks about how rigidity and structure saved his life. Going into rehab, he talked about, you know, the last time, you know, I was in and out of rehab. And the last time I was in rehab, I said, I'm going to follow all the rules they tell me. You can hear it in his voice, just like how serious it was. And he says it himself, that following the rules and being strict with the rules, about the rules, became a matter of life and death. It's the thing that saved his life. And in that moment, you realize that Jason isn't being anal, quote unquote, or particular or nitpicky for shits and giggles. It's not because it's for no other reason other than the association in his brain is being strict about the rules is what saves your life. It is what saved my life. And so you understand how important it is and how meaningful it is to him to be very strict and very particular and very structured. And Marjorie does a lovely job of letting Jason know that she understands that, of saying, you know, I get it. I get it. This isn't, you are not being strict and rigid just because you want things your way. It's so much more meaningful than that. It's so much deeper than that. This way of life, this way of navigating life is what saved his life. And in that moment, there's just this, like, again, a lovely moment where Marjorie shows true understanding and is exemplifying what it means to truly listen to your partner without agreeing with your partner. So Marjorie didn't say, you're right, I'm going to change, I should be just as rigid, or I should be just as strict, or okay, I will follow your rules, your way, because of your history with drug addiction and the fact that this way of life saved you. No, that's not what happened. She simply said, I totally understand. I get it. I understand why it's so important to you, and I understand that this means life and death to you. And Orna does a good job of basically almost like reminding Jason that Marjorie is different. So we cannot apply the same rules. It's okay if you are very strict. It's okay if you follow the rules in a very strict way. That's fine, but you can't expect everyone around you to follow the rules as strictly. So they eventually come up with a schedule / plan for cleaning out the litter box. And Orna's like, we're going to try this as an experiment and we're going to see how it goes. And that's often a sentiment and a statement that I use with my couples is like, listen, let's just try this as an experiment. Let's see what happens. And I do this with individuals too, of course. But I find that that sentiment comes up more with the couples work that I do, but not exclusively, where I'll say like, let's try this new thing out, see how it goes, report back next week, and we'll take it from there. And then last but not least, we have Nessa and Drea. So one of the things they talk about mainly in this particular session is the story arc, let's call it, of their intimacy. And this is something that is so common. I almost want to say that every couple deals with this at some point, but I haven't met every couple, so that doesn't feel appropriate to say, but it's so common. I can only guess that most couples have to talk about this or experience this, which is, again, the story arc of a couple's intimacy. And so Nessa is talking about how in the beginning, Drea wanted sex all the time and they were having sex, a bunch of sex. Then there was a dry spell, as they call it. And Nessa mentions that Drea, for about a year, did not want to have any sex, did not want to be intimate. They don't talk about why. They don't get into any specifics as to why, but they both agree, yes, there was a dry spell. And Drea was like, yeah, I did not want to have sex for about a year. Then they talk about how once Drea turned 40, that she was feeling incredibly sexual again and wanted to have sex again. And Nessa essentially is talking about the resentment that she felt for, as she put it, going without intimacy for a year. So a couple of things that I just want to highlight right now. Again, the story arc of intimacy. It really is like a roller coaster ride. Like it goes up and down. It ebbs and flows. That is totally normal for couples to have a period where they're having sex regularly, or they're having more sex than usual, or they're having sex often, consistently, and periods where a couple is not. Or they're having sex a lot less regularly or a lot less often, and then to go back to having sex regularly or more consistently again. It really can ebb and flow. Sometimes there are circumstances involved that lead to that. There might be physical issues, aging plays a role, there may have been a betrayal, some crisis that needed everyone's attention first, that needed to be kind of like triaged immediately, which can make it difficult to access sexual feelings. Not impossible, but really difficult. So there's lots of reasons why there's an ebb and flow to it. But the main takeaway I want you to have is that there is an ebb and flow to intimacy with, I won't say every, even though I want to say every couple, but with most couples. So I want to normalize that. The next thing I want to normalize is intimacy for some people is really difficult to access if it feels like there's unfinished business, if it feels like there are unresolved issues. It can be really difficult for some folks. And this is not gendered. Let me just say that. This isn't just women who experience this. A lot of men that I've worked with, if they feel like there's something in the air, some tension or some issue that hasn't been resolved, it can be really, really nearly impossible for them to access erotic energies, sexual energy. And so I want to normalize that as well. There's nothing wrong. There's no pathology here, but it is good information for you to have about your partner if that's the case for them. So Drea is talking about the discomfort she feels around that like, why doesn't my wife want to have sex with me? And she's like, it must be so awful. Geez, it must be so terrible that she has a wife that wants to have sex with her, right? And you can obviously hear the sarcasm and the cynicism, but you can also see the pain in her eyes. There's this really powerful moment where Orna says, Drea, you're being cynical right now, and that's not going to get you anywhere. So instead of being cynical, and she very firmly but respectfully stops Drea from just going on and on with her cynicism. And she says, talk to me about what you're feeling. And this is when, my heart just went out to Drea so much in this moment, because instead of being cynical and like scoffing at Nessa, she says, it really sucks because all I hear is that she's done with me and wants to move on. And you can see the tears welling up in Drea's eyes, and you can see, it's palpable. You can feel just how sad she feels. She just wants to feel chosen by her wife, and she doesn't feel chosen by her wife. What she's hearing is, you're a burden and I don't want to be with you anymore, even though that's not explicitly exactly what Nessa is saying. That is how she's receiving it. And Orna does such a good job to shift Drea's focus away from being cynical and prickly and taking in little jabs towards what the sadness and the fear that she's actually feeling. And I just thought that was like a really beautiful moment. I think letting the cynicism play out for too long, it's what causes resentment. It's, what can cause contempt. And it's like death by 1,000 cuts after a while. You know what I mean? And so Orna does such a good job of helping Drea talk about what she's feeling in that moment, when her wife, Nessa, talks about not wanting to have sex with her because of some of the resentment she feels from the past, and some of the discomfort she feels around being intimate with her wife, because she doesn't want Drea to think, oh, if we're having sex, then that must mean everything is okay. Because Nessa's like, because everything's not okay. And that's the thing, right? That's what makes it difficult for Nessa to access sex or intimacy with her wife, is because she feels like by having sex with her, she is sort of saying through the act of sex that we're good, everything is okay, when in fact it isn't. So there are lots of reasons why someone may not be accessing their sexual energy. One of the more common ones that I hear about a lot is that there are unresolved issues that need attention before we can get to the sex. And there you have it. That is episode 2 of Couples Therapy. I hope you are finding this helpful and entertaining. Let me know. But yeah, that is it for today. As you know, I am a therapist, but this podcast is no substitute for good old-fashioned therapy. So take what's useful, leave the rest, and don't forget, therapy makes you what? Hotter. Bye.